Let's bring in our panel. We'll start there. Josh Holmes, co-host of the Ruthless podcast, former Chief of Staff to Senator Mitch McConnell, Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams, and Annie Linskey, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Listen, it's a lot of drama, Annie, heading into Davos. But we talked about it last night that, you know, the thought process that the U.S. is going to invade Greenland just does not come into people's lexicon. They think more this is about negotiating, getting to a place where they get a deal, and he's a deal maker.
He is a deal maker. He is a president businessman, and that's how I think I've been thinking a lot about this year. A president who's a businessman. We've had just recently presidents who've been lawyers, and this is quite a different approach. And when it comes to Greenland, I think it is very much overshadowing not only the announcements that Trump wanted to make about housing, about affordability, but also the agenda that the Europeans have, which is to talk about Ukraine and Russia. And so my sense is there is an effort afoot to try to refocus on those two things. But look, the president is previewing some kind of deal on Greenland, so I think we're going to hear more.
And it's going to take a lot of oxygen. And to your point, he has a long list of objectives if you look at him for Davos, and he wants to talk about all kinds of things, energy and housing and affordability and all kinds of things on the world stage. But this is going to take a lot of attention.
Yeah, I sort of wish they would just give him Greenland so he could get onto all that other stuff because he's on this. He has not let it go. He's been speaking about this for, what feels like forever. I mean, the strategic value of Greenland from a defense perspective is obvious. I think there's a lot of world leaders and even domestic people in his own party that question the strategic import at this particular time of making that issue A1A abroad. But I think to Annie's point, he is a negotiator, and everything is up for negotiation. He now has a new piece of leverage in there where it opens the aperture to talk about all of it.
Yeah, and listen, I had the Denmark foreign minister, the Danish foreign minister, who essentially said, hey, we'll do the deal. We'll let you do whatever you want. Yeah, right. So I think eventually they get there. But Juan, there's also this issue that a lot of folks are bringing up, that China is now getting closer to our allies. We just mentioned the big Chinese embassy in the UK. We just saw the Canadian Prime Minister travel to Beijing, Prime Minister Carney, and his meeting with Xi Jinping. And here is French President Macron on what he sees with China.
China is welcome, but what we need is more Chinese foreign direct investment in Europe, in some key sectors, to contribute to our growth, to transfer some technologies, and not just to export towards Europe some devices or products which sometimes don't have the same standards or are much more subsidized as the one being produced in Europe.
Not sure the deal with the glasses.
I was about to say, I wish I could be that fashionable on Special Report.
Thoughts?
But I do think that there's a great insecurity, not only on the part of Macron, as you just heard, about the U.S. action here and the sense that the United States is acting apart from NATO and therefore threatening the NATO alliance with specific reference to Greenland, but just the sense that they don't know what Trump will do next.
And you're looking at Carney in Beijing. Go ahead.
And, we think about the foreign governments who are a little anxious, but, today the stock market clearly signaled they're anxious too about his actions or his handling of Greenland. And Denmark says they're going to stop buying U.S. treasuries. Now, they're trying to exercise their own leverage against the United States government, but really against Donald Trump, and say, it would be a threat to the U.S. economy. Because if Trump is imposing tariffs to get his way on Greenland, it'll do tremendous damage to the Europeans. But I think there would be some repercussions for the U.S. government overall. And, today with the press conference, he says he thinks he's doing great in the first years with specific reference to the economy. The polls don't show that the American people agree on that point. He sounds a little bit like Biden on this,
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, the Real Clear Politics average of polls in comparison to other presidents puts him right about the same spot. I mean, he's if you look at the chart there, he's 42.5. That's where Obama was. Bush had uptick there at 43.6, but roughly where they are. Here is the president walking in on the first year of his second year.
These are accomplishments. This is the anniversary, first anniversary, January 20th. I could stand here and read it for a week and we wouldn't be finished. but we've done more than any other administration has done by far in terms of military, in terms of ending wars, in terms of completing wars. Nobody's really seen very much like it.
The White House putting out 365 wins in 365 days, new era of success, prosperity, securing the borders, making communities safe, rebuilding economy for working Americans, championing American workers. Andy, there are a lot of lists of stuff they got done.
Oh, yeah.
And so for all the hubbub and all the talk, they did move the needle in a lot of different ways.
Yes, I mean, this is a consequential president. He has transformed the presidency. And you know, to your earlier point about China, one of the points that he emphasized was Venezuela and the successful effort there to get rid of not only Maduro, but also Chinese influence in that oil-rich state, which now the United States has control over. So, there's an example where the Chinese had a strong toehold in the United States' backyard, and they've been pushed out. So, yes, the Chinese are coming back and sort of flirting with our allies, but I think the president would say that one of their major accomplishments was pushing China out in that area.
I'm getting told that President Macron had a itchy and puffy eye, so he wore glasses because of that. So I just wanted to clarify for all you Macron watchers out there. There was a lot of news. It was an hour and 20 minutes before he took questions. Then he took questions. It went on for 2 hours almost. This is about Iran and possible military action.
So with Iran, they were going to hang 837 people, and I let them be known that, and we let them know that if that happens, that will be a very bad day for them. And they decided not to do it. So we're just going to have to see what happens with Iran. Is the military option off the table?
No, is the short answer. It's not off the table. In fact, there's a carrier battle group that's going to be in position in about a day. And, Davos, who knows? It could be more drama if there's something else with Iran.
Well, he made extraordinarily clear that if Iran is continuing to kill people who are protesting, that is a red line that he is focused on, and there have been some movement on that over the last week. But I think if you back off and look at that press conference as a whole, Iran is included in this. I think this president's year is marked by his willingness to go through and take on intractable issues that have bedeviled presidents for generations, both foreign issues and domestic issues. I mean, you look at things like the border. Well, until you encounter a cottage industry of groups and people who are trying to prevent you from doing anything, you don't really understand how difficult that is. He did it. He did it. Fraud, Doge, all of these things that have come up that have cottage industries that are designed to prevent presidents from addressing, he has done it. Venezuela is another one. The Middle East, you look at with Iran, time and time again, he's put an amazing amount of political capital into these big issues.
Yeah, we always say we're one election away from solving big issues. They have moved the ball in a number of big ones.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.